bourgeoisie produces, above all, art zone. Grave diggers.
Hey everyone.
Hey folks, welcome back.
It's Erin from Seoul, Korea.
And it's Amr in Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
And welcome to another episode of Das Criminal Podcast.
Your weekly criminal podcast, or rather podcast about crime, not a criminal podcast in the sense that we're doing money laundering or anything.
We have a really exciting episode this week. It was chosen by our Patreon subscribers who voted on it, so thank you guys.
Yeah, we are truly a democratic institution.
I think we also have a Radio Warner update. I think I woke up this morning with a notification.
Yeah, the third episode of my series with the good guys at Radio Warner, John and Mark, is up now. So if you're subscribed to Radio Warner as well, please do check us out there. It's really an interesting series.
Yeah, so make sure to check Amr out over there. Like I said, I got a notification because I subscribed to Radio Warner to hear his episodes, and I thought it was worth it.
Oh, thank you.
This is the second mass shooting we've done this month, if you include our Patreon bonus episode on the 2017 Las Vegas shooting. But unfortunately, this type of violence has become really common in the United States, as I'm sure all of our listeners know. So we just want to give a content warning for extreme anti-immigrant violence, fascism. This is kind of a downer episode, just so you guys know going into it. On October 3rd, 2019, a gunman attacked the Walmart Supercenter near the Cielo Vista Mall in El Paso, Texas. Armed with a Romanian WASR-10 rifle, the shooter killed 23 people and injured 23 others. As El Paso has a large population of reported Hispanic or Latino people, and that specific Walmart serves people from both El Paso and the neighboring Ciudad Juárez in Mexico, the assault has been described by the New York Times as, quote, the deadliest anti-Latino attack in modern American history, end quote.
Yeah, the irony of this event is where it happened at Walmart, where Walmart basically sell rifles to people in many states in America without any questions asked. I find that fascinating.
A 21-year-old white man from Allen, Texas, named Patrick Crusius was arrested for the shooting and charged with capital murder. Now, we must acknowledge Crusius has not yet stood trial and has therefore not been found guilty for these crimes in a court of law. Consequently, we can only identify him as a suspect in this case, a suspect who identified himself as the shooter as he surrendered to the Texas Rangers, and whose name corresponds with an anti-immigrant manifesto posted online shortly before the attack. Crusius's screed mentions eco-fascism and a right-wing conspiracy theory known as the Great Replacement as motivations behind such an attack. In this episode, we're going to talk about what those things mean, why they're bullshit, and what we on the left might do to combat such racist ideas. So let's start with a short analysis of the shooting itself. In short, a gunman opened fire in the El Paso Walmart parking lot just before 10:40 a.m. on Saturday, August 3rd, 2019.
Which, by the way, itself is an interesting choice of time and day because I imagine, and I could be wrong, but I imagine that Saturday mornings would be exceptionally busy in retail, given that that's when 9-to-5 workers go to buy stuff. Because I work 9 to 5, when I shop, I usually shop on the weekend, so I imagine it's the same for a lot of people.
The store manager at the Walmart issued a code brown to employees, indicating an active shooter. The employees began helping customers evacuate or hide. I did used to work in retail, and we had to watch videos about what to do if there was ever an active shooter at the store. So our instructions were to run, hide, and fight in that order. So if we could escape, we should run. If not, we should try and hide from the gunmen. And if there were no other options, then we should fight. And it's very disturbing that workers must now train for the possibility of an active shooter.
Yeah, I read something a bit ago about how teachers are also trained for active shooters in the US. And one US senator or congressperson, I forget, unironically posited that school children should be taught to rush the shooter in a sort of human wave attack, basically to overwhelm them, which I think is insane and also par on course for the US mindset.
Yeah, I took a self-defense class once, and we were learning about disarming people. And I mean, basically, the best thing you can try to do is run, because even if they shoot at you, they might not hit you. And if they do hit you, they might not kill you.
Yeah.
But in the event of a shooting like that, our instructor was like, you could try to rush the shooter because these guys are cowards and they would be really freaked out if you yelled and tried to run at them. And I was like, would they? Are they in almost this kind of trance-like state where they would just shoot me?
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen from the Christchurch shooter, people did try to rush him and he just shot them down. Like, these people aren't going to be scared at some unarmed kid running at them.
Yeah.
They have a purpose there, and it is to shoot people. And also the other alternative being arming teachers is, to me, terrifying, because I just think of some of the teachers I've had in school myself, and the idea of giving them Glocks when they barely couldn't handle difficult students is definitely something I'd worry about.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The shooter entered the crowded Walmart, where estimates put the number of customers and staff at as many as thousands of people on a Saturday morning. With that many people, it's cynically astounding that the shooter only killed 23 people and wounded 23 others. Those Walmart employees who helped people flee are heroes.
Yeah, oh yeah.
First responders arrived at the scene within 6 minutes of the first 911 call, and the gunman fled the scene. Among the victims were 13 Americans, 8 Mexicans, and 1 German. 17 were 56 years or older, and 1 was only 15. Several of the wounded victims were children, 1 as young as 2 years old. The 23 people murdered in the shooting have been identified as follows. Jordan and Andre Anchondo, aged 24 and 23, died shielding their 2-month-old son from gunfire. They also left behind another 5-year-old daughter for whom they were shopping for school supplies that Saturday morning. Arturo Benavides, 60, was a bus driver who loved telling stories of his days in the army and listening to classic rock.
Javier Rodriguez, who was 15 and loved soccer and was mourned by his high school team. Sarah Esther Regalado Moriel was 66, and Adolfo Ceros Hernandez, 68, were Mexican citizens who left behind 3 daughters and 4 grandchildren. Gloria Irma Marquez, 61, had 6 siblings, 4 children, and 4 grandchildren. She loved flowers and bright colors, and her family asked that mourners wear white with pops of color rather than black to her funeral. Maria Eugenia Legarate Roce, 58, was on her way to pick up her teenage daughter Natalie at the El Paso airport and thought she'd run some errands on the way.
Ivan Hilierto Manzano, 46, left behind his wife, Adri, and their 2 children, ages 8 and 5. He worked at a radio station in Ciudad Juárez and was devoted to his family and church. Juan de Dios Velázquez Juárez, 77, left behind his wife, Nicolasa, who was also shot in the stomach and head in El Paso but survived. They had 6 children and more than a dozen grandchildren. David Johnson, 63, died shielding his wife, Kathy, and their 9-year-old granddaughter, Caitlin, from the attack. His last words were directing his family to safety. Leonardo Campos Jr., 41, and Maribel Campos Loya, 56, had been married for 16 years and had 4 children. Angelina Silva Inglesby, 86, was a mother of 8 and a grandmother to over 20 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As her husband died when her children were young, she mostly raised them on her own. She was a massive fan of the Dallas Cowboys.
Maria and Raul Flores, 77 and 83 respectively, met at a tailor shop where Raul worked and had been married for 60 years. They had 3 children, 11 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren. Jorge Calvila Garcia, 61, was in the parking lot with his son Luis and granddaughter Emily, raising money for Emily's soccer team. Luis was also shot but survived. Jorge and Luis managed to shield Emily and her teammates from the bullets. Guillermo Memo Garcia was also fundraising for the soccer team when he was shot multiple times. Memo died nearly 9 months later after dozens of surgeries. His wife Jessica was shot but also survived. Memo had a son and a daughter. Alexander Gerard Hoffman, 66, was a retired German Air Force member who had lived in Chihuahua for over 40 years with his wife, a Mexican citizen, and their 3 children. He loved literature. Luis Alfonso Juarez, 90, had 7 children, 20 grandchildren, 35 great-grandchildren, and 8 great-great-grandchildren. His wife Martha was injured in the shooting but survived.
Elsa Mendoza Marquez, 57, left her husband and son in the car while she quickly ran into the Walmart to make a school supply purchase. She left behind her husband and 2 children. She was a special education teacher in Juárez. Teresa Sanchez, 82, was a retired biology teacher. She was leaving Walmart with her sister Rosa and niece Rosemary when all 3 were shot. Rosa and Rosemary survived, but Teresa died the next day. Margie Record, 63, was a mother of 3 who was battling Parkinson's at the time of her death. Her husband, Antonio Basco, invited the community of El Paso to her funeral, and nearly 4,000 people attended. So those are the people who were killed in the El Paso shooting. As we did during our Las Vegas episode, we also want to emphasize that survivors of a mass shooting might still have lifelong disabilities, not to mention significant post-traumatic stress from the event. Plus, the families and friends of the victims and their communities are also impacted by such a violent act.
Yeah, not to belabor the point too much, but I also wanted to emphasize the financial costs of these medical injuries in the US, where a lack of insurance means pretty much 6-figure debt for being shot at shopping at a Walmart.
After the massacre, the gunman fled the scene. According to a warrant of arrest filed on the 4th of August, 2019, in the state of Texas, DPS Rangers responded to the scene and encountered a vehicle at the intersection of Viscount and Sunmount, stopped in a left turning lane. The driver then exited the vehicle with his hands in the air and stated to the agents, quote, "I'm the shooter," end quote. The defendant was then placed under arrest and taken to the police station. Now, we will point out, as many people have regarding the capture of white supremacist mass murderer Dylann Roof, that this armed and dangerous racist was apprehended by law enforcement without injury. We're not saying police should brutalize anyone. You guys know we don't think that at all. But we're just noting that more than once, white supremacist shooters have been taken alive, whereas in contrast, Black people who have committed no acts of violence whatsoever have been murdered by law enforcement in their sleep. Then, according to the arrest warrant, the suspect waived his Miranda rights, meaning he decided to speak to the interrogating officer without consulting an attorney. I'm glad he did this because he sounds like a racist piece of shit who deserves to rot, but a reminder to our listeners, never, ever waive your Miranda rights.
Yeah, I mean, waiving your Miranda rights is pretty much the racist psychopath equivalent of writing a confession in a diary, which for Aaron and I being podcast co-hosts is great in providing us with content.
The defendant then told law enforcement that he drove from Allen, Texas, about 650 miles away near Dallas, to the Walmart in El Paso. He entered the Walmart with an AK-47 assault rifle and multiple magazines. The gun was later identified as a Romanian WASR-10, which the suspect is believed to have purchased legally.
Yeah, keep in mind Texas has one of the most lax gun laws in the country, Based on the research I did for this, individuals are allowed to openly carry arms they purchase legally, and private gun sales can be conducted without background checks. And further to that, long arms, which is to say guns like rifles with longer barrels than, say, handguns, are technically not considered arms in Texas and can thus be purchased, owned, and openly or concealed carry without permit or prejudice. In other words, everything Crusius did up until the shooting was pretty much quite legal.
The suspect opened fire, eventually, as we now know, killing 23 people. And from that arrest warrant, quote, the defendant stated that his target were Mexicans, end quote. The warrant names the defendant as Patrick Wood Crusius, born July 27, 1998. I can't believe that this fuckface is younger than we are. He graduated from high school in 2017 and attended Collin College until spring of 2019. To me, he just sounds like another terminally online white guy who picks up a gun, like who becomes radicalized online. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely get like 4chan vibes from him.
Crusius has been charged with capital murder in Texas and 90 federal charges, including committing a hate crime resulting in death. The state of Texas is seeking the death penalty, while the United States Attorney General has not yet announced whether they will seek a federal capital sentence. Crusius has pleaded not guilty, with his lawyers citing alleged neurological and mental disabilities and claiming he was in a, quote, psychotic state, end quote, when arrested. I mean, okay, but mental illness doesn't make you racist.
Yeah, also mental illness doesn't make you shoot people. Like, just to remind people that most people with mental health issues are a danger more to themselves than to others. Also, considering his initial interview with the cops, I feel like, wouldn't that be used as a confession? Because especially since he waived his Miranda rights.
No, it's being used as a confession, but that doesn't mean he has to plead guilty.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, we also say, like, alleged shooter. It sounds to me like all the evidence points to him, he admitted to it, and his lawyers are even pursuing a defense that he's mentally ill, not that he didn't do it. So, although he hasn't had a trial, I think it's fair to say he did it and start to analyze why.
Yeah.
On the day of the shooting, El Paso Police Chief Greg Allen announced that law enforcement was reasonably certain that the suspect in custody, Patrick Crusius, had released a manifesto on 8chan shortly before the shooting. Now, if you don't know what 8chan is, first of all, congratulations. Second of all, it's an anonymous message board where users can post pretty much anything.
Yeah, the irony being that 8chan was a result of a factional dispute on 4chan, where some people left 4chan because they thought, and hear this out, they thought 4chan was too restrictive, which tells you all about 8chan.
Yeah, 8chan really is just the more extreme version of 4chan, which is a website that hosts conspiracy theories and things like QAnon. We've gone over 4chan culture before on the podcast. But according to Wikipedia, 8chan, quote, has been linked to white supremacism, neo-Nazism, the alt-right, racism and anti-Semitism, hate crimes, and multiple mass shootings. The site is also known for hosting child pornography, end quote. Why the fuck would anybody ever want to go on that website?
Yeah, no idea, honestly.
So the manifesto, titled The Inconvenient Truth, has been reposted many times. It's not difficult to find online, but be warned, it's a racist screed filled with violent reactionary talking points. And while the writer denies that Donald Trump influenced his decision to shoot dozens of people, the ethno-nationalism espoused in his manifesto echoes the discourse of several prominent right-wingers. Again, Patrick Crusius has not yet stood trial for these crimes. However, someone published this manifesto online, and we think it's worth breaking down what's in his manifesto because it recites several fascist talking points that have taken hold of groups in the United States and Europe. So the manifesto opens with, quote, "In general, I support the Christchurch shooter and his manifesto," end quote. And to give some background on what that means, on March 15th, 2019, less than 5 months before the El Paso attack, an Australian white supremacist attacked 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. He killed 51 people and injured 40. He also published an online manifesto and live-streamed the attack. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life without parole, the first time that sentence was ever handed down in New Zealand.
Yeah, it also led to a significant revamp of gun legislation in New Zealand, and it was passed with massive popular support. And I have mixed feelings about gun legislation in general and the right to bear arms, but it does warrant discussing, for example, how immobile the US legislative system is with this particular issue.
Yeah, we might do an episode on the Christchurch shooting in the future as well, but we also just don't want to devote so much time to researching white supremacist shooters. Like, it's draining for us, it's draining for you, it's repetitive, and we don't like giving these guys attention beyond discussing how fascism is inherently violent. So, this manifesto's author, the El Paso shooter, it identifies him as a fascist right off the bat, like saying he identifies with the Christchurch shooter. Despite supporting the Christchurch shooter, though, which this struck me as kind of interesting, the El Paso attacker didn't attack mosques. And there are mosques in El Paso, I checked. So I think the most revealing part here is that the shooter draws a connection between white supremacists everywhere, no matter who their target. Amr and I aren't like fabricating these networks when we say white supremacists in North America and Europe and Australia, New Zealand are connected. They are globally linked in their ideologies and their agendas. And as a result, all of us must show a united front against them.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly talk to each other explicitly and not just, there's not just an implicit sort of connection. They explicitly, encourage each other. So it's important to understand that these aren't just isolated pockets. There is a broader movement of far-right extremists.
Like a global network of them. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, Amr, but a lot of them are from Canada, where you are.
Oh, yeah. It's a very depressing place to be here.
The author of this manifesto then writes, quote, "This attack is a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas. I am simply defending my country from cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by an invasion," end quote.
Yeah, I find his rhetoric really interesting insofar as Texas is a castle doctrine state, which basically stipulates that an individual has a right to shoot and kill any perceived invader of their private space. And I checked, and the law says, quote, "Residents lawfully occupying a dwelling may use deadly force against a person who unlawfully and with force enters or attempts to enter the dwelling, or who unlawfully and with force removes or attempts to remove someone from that dwelling, or who commits or attempts to commit a qualifying felony such as aggravated kidnapping, murder, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, robbery, or aggravated robbery," end quote. And to me, that pretty much reveals the barest truth insofar as it harkens back to the foundational American mythos of the lone settler man, and it is a man, and, the idea of defending the family and property from any and all perceived threat through arms and singular will. And this idea of individual Americans owning the land and defending it from what is seen as non-American is a sort of cornerstone of American nation building and identity building, and it's now manifested in these mass shootings.
It also points to an interesting general psychology where if you have a gun in your house and you have it there because you think if someone tries to invade my house, break into my house, I'm going to shoot them with this gun. That's a decision that you've already made. And I can't relate because I haven't made that decision. If someone was trying to break into my apartment to hurt me, and I was pretty sure of that, and I did have a gun, I suppose I could use it, but I could not shoot someone just trying to take my laptop.
Yeah, same here. If I had a gun and I don't know, someone was trying to mug me or whatever, I don't think I'd be able to shoot them, even though they were trying to mug me.
No, I definitely couldn't. And I did used to carry pepper spray, like a non-lethal defense weapon, and I felt much better with that than I would feel carrying a gun. Also because I get really sad sometimes, so I don't want a gun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. Same here.
Yeah, if you are a gun owner, there's one person 7 times more likely to shoot you with that gun than anyone else, and it's you.
Yeah. Person you see in the mirror every morning.
So, the author of this manifesto goes on to explain that some may find him hypocritical because Europeans brought about the ethnic destruction of Native Americans, but that this destruction proves his point, quote unquote, actually, he writes, the Hispanic community was not my target before I read The Great Replacement. A lot to unpack here, and unpack it we will, but I just want to start with a quick refresher for some of our listeners on the differences between the terms Hispanic, Latino, and Chicano. Hispanic is someone who is native of or descends from a Spanish-speaking country. So, white people from Spain are Hispanic. Black people from Guinea Equatorial are Hispanic. Nazi descendants from Argentina are Hispanic. Brazilians are not Hispanic because the national language of Brazil is Portuguese, the same way Haitians are not Hispanic because they speak Haitian Creole. Latino, Latina, and Latinx are people who are native of or descendants from a Latin American country. These include Mexico, Central and South America, and, in most analyses, the Caribbean. So, someone from Brazil is Latinx, but someone from Spain is not. Chicano and Chicana are people who are native of or descendants from Mexico, but live in the United States. Among all these groups, you have white people, black people, brown people, indigenous people, mixed people, the list goes on. And my point in saying this is to illustrate that Hispanic is not a synonym for brown Mexicans, though lots of people in the United States often use it that way. And we realize racists do not care about being technically accurate in their terminology. We're just going over this so that some of our listeners, especially those who might live far outside the Western Hemisphere and be less familiar with these terms, can get a quick refresher on what they're supposed to mean.
Yeah, I do want to add that these terms cover the Anglosphere's perception of Spain and Latin America. And meanwhile, in Latin America, race is understood as something completely different, where ethnic lines are drawn between white settlers from Europe, a mestizo population of descendants of European settlers who occupy a rung below the so-called whites and are seen as a sort of Latinized Europeans, and the large great mass at the bottom being of descendants of slaves and of indigenous peoples. And this is just to recognize that these terms make sense in the context of the Anglo-speaking North. They might find much less salience in countries and regions in question. Insofar as race and ethnicity operate very differently in different areas and across different time periods.
Yeah, it's just interesting that the author of the manifesto, and obviously he's ignorant, he's a racist, but he says he has a problem with Hispanic people. And Hispanic really is a linguistic nomenclature much more than it is an ethnic one. So many people in the US, they mean, when they say Hispanic, they mean typically Mexicans and Central Americans, but Hispanic is like the Spanish language.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's like when people talk about Semitic people and yes, anti-Semitism means people who are racist toward Jewish people or discriminatory toward Jewish people, but Semitism is not a thing. There are Semitic languages, but there's no real group of people
who are
Semites.
Yeah.
Semites, yeah. Crucially, the manifesto's author refers to The Great Replacement, a book and racist conspiracy theory by French writer Renaud Camus.
Not the famous Albert Camus, just in case anyone is confused. This is not the guy who wrote The Stranger.
Yeah, totally different guy. In summary, The Great Replacement theorizes that Black and brown people, particularly Muslims, are progressively replacing white people in Europe and North America through immigration and a difference in birth rates. I mean, honestly, if this were true, it would be hilarious. If some Canadian had to be sent to the Middle East so that Amr could live in Toronto. Better buy some sunscreen, Robert. You're on your way to the Gulf.
Yeah, it's also funny how white Europeans and North Americans moving to the Gulf are often called expats. Whereas me moving to Toronto, I'm considered an immigrant. So it's just, thinking emoji time.
Scholars like demographer Landis McKellar have already noted that the Great Replacement is not a statistically sound theory and is based in racism rather than fact. Far-right provocateur Lauren Southern did a video on the Great Replacement, which was then debunked point by YouTuber Sean. Southern ended up deleting her video, most likely because Sean indicated how her discussion was simply fodder for racists. But I definitely recommend checking out Sean's video because it's well-researched, and I relish in any chance to tell the right that facts and logic don't care about your feelings. But I also want to discuss why debunking racists isn't enough. We can take apart replacement theory bit by bit, and I do think knowing that racists are absolutely full of shit is important, but we're not going to win arguments against fascists with a solid debunking. And again, this is no shade whatsoever towards Sean. I think his video is excellent and probably an effective tool at pulling people toward the left in the game of the YouTube algorithm. Plus, it seemed to get Southern to remove her video, so that is a point. Fascist propaganda doesn't care about being factually correct. Actually, we run the risk of legitimizing them by debating them in things like demographic trends. The Great Replacement is a way to dog whistle to other xenophobes, to signify that one is both aware of and opposed to immigration.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that Sartre quote from his book, Anti-Semite and Jew, where he says, quote, "Never believe that anti-Semites are completely unaware of the absurdity of their replies. They know that their remarks are frivolous, open to challenge. But they are amusing themselves, for it is their adversary who is obliged to use words responsibly, since he believes in words. The anti-Semites have the right to play. They even like to play with discourse, for, by giving ridiculous reasons, they discredit the seriousness of their interlocutors. They delight in acting in bad faith, since they do seek not to persuade by sound argument, but to intimidate and disconcert. If you press them too closely, they will abruptly fall silent, loftily indicating by some phrase the time for argument is past." End quote.
And all of this is most evidenced, in my opinion, by the actions of the Christchurch and El Paso shooters. Obviously, they weren't interested in engaging in dialogue or robust debate. They are both racist losers trying to feel some semblance of power by committing acts of violence against defenseless people and draw attention to their deranged racist screed.
Yeah, it also underlies the point that there is no such thing as a marketplace of ideas. To quote Mao Zedong, when he says the political power grows out of the barrel of a gun, this is what he means, where politics essentially is a conflict between different interest groups with mutually exclusive interests vying for control over the levers of power, and power is embodied by the state's monopoly on legitimate violence.
Part of me worries about giving these people any attention, but on the other hand, these are things that have happened that were perpetrated by fascists, and I think we're fooling ourselves to pretend it doesn't exist or neglect discussing how fascism begets violence towards marginalized peoples. And for these same reasons, I also worry that trying to read and interpret any of these manifestos from a logical, sensitive standpoint will just never work because these people are neither rational nor empathetic. And to give you an idea of what I mean by illogical, I'll read a quote to you from the El Paso Murderers Manifesto and then explain why it's bullshit. So, quote, "The American lifestyle affords our citizens an incredible quality of life. However, our lifestyle is destroying the environment of our country. The decimation of the environment is creating a massive burden for future generations. Corporations are heading the destruction of our environment by shamelessly over-harvesting resources. This has been a problem for decades. For example, this phenomenon is brilliantly portrayed in the decades-old class, The Lorax," end quote. Okay, first of all, Dr. Seuss is fun, but it is not a reliable academic source. More importantly, however, There is an argument that if every person on the planet lived like Americans in terms of luxury and pollution, we would be destroying the environment even faster. But this doesn't support xenophobia. It supports a reduction in American consumerism rather than a reduction in Americans.
I think Dr. Seuss can be a reliable academic source. I mean, he clearly has a PhD. He is a doctor, so I would trust him.
No, that's a good point. People in any country, though, can emulate Americans in hyper-consumerist and wasteful practices. Trust me, I live in South Korea where this is the norm. I was born and raised in the United States, and I was shocked at the amount of plastic packaging in this country. And I recycle, as do most people here, but reducing is always better than recycling. It's on all of us to save the planet, and frankly, so-called wealthy countries and corporations are doing the most damage. This problem won't be solved by building a border wall with Mexico. Eco-fascism is the argument that in order to save the planet, we need to somehow cruelly reduce the number of people living here. But truthfully, it's a small number of people and corporations polluting the planet while most people, especially poor people in the global south, live sustainably and yet find themselves adversely affected by climate change.
Yeah, this is what boggles my mind the most. People like this shooter write about, the American lifestyle and fighting to preserve this quality of life, but they're willing to let countries like Bangladesh drown to keep what? Applebee's and cheesecake factories and strip malls and Levi's. This is a culture they want to maintain. They'd stack bodies wall high on the border to ensure the continuation of cheap beer and Marvel movies and, McDonald's and phones that die in a couple of years. It's just horrifying.
It also just doesn't make sense. Like, you do realize people in Mexico can also pollute the planet in Mexico if they are going to do that. They don't have to move and come to the United States.
Yeah, these people aren't known for their geographical expertise.
And having lived in different parts of the world, like I said, in Korea, the plastic packaging just blows my mind. Like, if you order a takeout coffee, they give it to you in a plastic bag.
Seriously?
Like, just hand me my coffee cup. Yeah, seriously, I have to tell them, no plastic bag, thank you.
That's bizarre.
But other places, like at least here, they recycle. When I lived in Amman, recycling was barely a thing.
Oh yeah, no, even recycling is seen as a joke or the end of a joke.
Yeah, and then of course in Lebanon, there's like a whole crisis about what to do with the garbage, so.
Yeah, I think Lebanon there's a lot more important things in Lebanon than, building recycling plants at this point.
But I think most important to this entire manifesto is that the logical endpoint to these kinds of ideas is ethnic cleansing and genocide. Because immigrants and their children, and Black and brown people generally, because we all know that's who these great replacement theorists are talking about, they aren't going to just pack up and move back to Senegal or wherever their ancestors might have lived because some whiny white YouTubers want an ethno-state. The only solution is then to force people to leave, which is ethnic cleansing, or kill them, which is genocide. And a lot of people have no specific place to go back to. Is this like closing time? Like, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here?
Yeah, and let's be real. These people also don't mean go back to like immigrants from Germany or Norway or the UK or whatnot. They have a very particular image of what immigrant they don't like and that needs to be expelled. And it's entirely race and ethnic based.
It's also interesting when Donald Trump says, like, these people aren't coming from Norway. You do know Norwegian Anders Breivik shot and killed dozens of children, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone from Norway is a fucking saint. The same way not everyone from every country in the world is an angel. Like, that's how it is.
Neither extreme should dictate immigration policy for a country.
And I think even if you say, like, oh, well, the people here can stay, but we need to close the borders now. Well, how does that work? Because are we all going to be confined by these arbitrary lines according to the place we were born? Like, racism aside, that's not the world we live in.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of comments on like British news websites where guys who voted for Brexit, specifically they voted for Brexit to seal the border and stop immigration, are now like surprised Pikachu face, because they're made to stand in long custom lines in EU countries. And their freedom of movement to the various European Union countries is limited. And these people want to move anywhere, but no one else is allowed to move anywhere to be where they are.
Yeah, borders for thee, but not for me.
Essentially, yeah.
The same attitudes often lead to forced sterilization as well. Last month, ICE in the United States was accused of performing unnecessary hysterectomies, or removal of the reproductive organs, on women in their custody. And states, fascist states, and right-leaning states have a long, long history of doing this. So Patrick Crusius has been charged and, as of October 2020, will be tried for 23 murders and a host of other crimes. If he indeed committed this violence and wrote that manifesto, his motive is pretty clear: pure, unadulterated racism. Don't let euphemisms like the Great Replacement fool you. These conspiracy theories are based in denial that people of different races, ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, etc. can live together.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to end it for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed, or at least found our episode informative and interesting. If you like us, please rate us on Apple Podcasts. Reviewing does really well for our exposure. Please follow us on Instagram at DasCriminalPod, on Twitter at DasCriminalPod, and check out our Patreon for bonus content at www.patreon.com/DasCriminal.
Yeah, and you can also listen to Amar's latest Radio War Nerd episode that is out now. And I think you said there's one more coming, Amar?
Yeah, I'm preparing the notes for the last one. Should be a four episode series.
Yeah, we should have another short bonus episode up this week for our $5 and up Patreon subscribers. And for the rest of you, happy Halloween.
Yeah, happy spooky weekend. Until next time, everyone.
Bye.